So, will we move on?
Yes.
To, well, actually, the one film I guess I didn't like. 1982's Losing Ground is important simply by existing, being the first feature-length drama to be directed by a black American woman, Kathleen Collins in this case, since the 1920s. And if that wasn't an egregious enough length of time, the film itself was largely ignored until the director's daughter restored it in 2015 and it gained interest in academic and critical circles. The partly autobiographical film is a slice of life of a philosophy professor, Sarah Surratt Scott, and her artist husband Victor, played by Bill Gunn. Despite being a successful academic and an educator, the film's opening sees Sarah being regarded and measured by many of her students and even her own mother in relation to her husband. Victor has just had one of his landscapes bought by a museum, and this legitimacy prompts him to explore other aspects of his art. To this end, he wants to spend the summer upstate in a rented home to use as a studio, though Sarah is quite reluctant as she wants to stay in New York to work on her thesis about religious ecstasy. Following his muse, there's a good euphemism, Victor becomes interested in the largely Puerto Rican female inhabitants of the town, distancing himself from Sarah and eventually driving her back to the city, where she decides to take up the offer of one of her former students to act in his art film. This leads her, eventually, to cheat on Victor, physically and emotionally, while he's doing the same to her, though each unknown to the other. And, well, things don't begin promisingly, with a horrible saxophone score suggesting insipid 80s sitcom or daytime drama. Of the many cultural crimes of the 80s, the preponderance of the saxophone may be at the very top of the charge sheet. Before cutting to a wide-eyed reaction shot right out of a comedy sketch from one of the students in Sarah's class. Sarah, by the way, is dressed in the most ridiculously over-the-top, old academic woman garb you can imagine, in an attempt to make the transformation into the sexy dancer she portrays in our student's film in the latter part seem more pronounced. It's so on the nose and so ham-fisted that the only things missing are a chain for the overly large glasses she wears and her arrival in the film set in a pair of leather trousers to the beats of "You're the One That I Want." Victor's decision about where the couple will spend their summer certainly demonstrates his arrogance and general belief that his work takes precedence and that Sarah's, because she's a woman, is of secondary importance. But his lack of consideration for the paucity of libraries in the vicinity of the rental home simply is not the monstrously selfish act the film relies on it being. The thing about books is that they're remarkably portable, and, well, most libraries let you take out more than one at a time. Bit of a non-issue to be a central part of your film. Much of this is compounded by a cast of variable quality, with only Bill Gunn and Dwayne Jones really feeling like accomplished performers. While your mileage may vary, I found Surratt Scott to be rather poor, though much of the rest I put down to budget and perhaps a smaller available talent pool. Dwayne Jones does first appear in a hat and cape though, and this is clearly awesome and ameliorates some of the other pain points. Those shortcomings really frustrate me, as there absolutely is solid material in there. While not electrifying, the dialogue is very natural and believable, with a real veracity too. For example, the niggly little bar was traded between Sarah and Victor. Victor's belief in the primacy of his own career and his resentment at Sarah's intrusion into art, his field, is also something that's been played out in thousands of real relationships. This may even have been an important film too, showing as it does a representation of black middle-class intelligentsia, had it been seen. But it wasn't seen, meaning that its post-2015 rebirth renders it merely a curiosity, and unfortunately, Losing Ground is just too dull and unremarkable for me to care about, and I really, really struggle to see where the rave reviews are coming from.
I didn't mind Losing Ground. It is not... I don't really disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I think I've seen much worse films not get a wide distribution. That means that this feels wrong, that it's just been... I mean, it sat on a shelf. I don't think it even got distribution back when it was made in the 80s. And
it just got...
a couple of just festival screenings of that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It never got picked up for this. Now, yeah, I don't really disagree with a lot of what you're saying there. But it's a shame that that Sarah's character, Sarah Scott's, not better. I don't think she's really bad, but given that her character is, of course, the whole point of the film, some of it doesn't get its point across quite as well as it should have done. In terms of all of its messaging and what it goes on to, and the kind of the struggles of taking a kind of feminist approach to how women's work is treated and all that kind of stuff, I think its messaging is always sound and on point, and I don't have any concerns with that. I think it's just unfortunately that some of the ways that it's done seem a bit not quite amateurish, but it's clearly hampered by its lack of budget in a number of areas. There's some locations that don't look quite right. Some of the kind of sets, the way it's been shot, don't look particularly great. Some of it looks a bit television-ish. A little unfortunate that it couldn't kind of up its game in those areas, because I think a lot of the actual story I'm more or less on board with. I'm kind of on board with how the characters treat each other and how they're portrayed. There's a lot of things that I like in here. It doesn't quite hang together as well as I hoped it would, given the kind of reception that it's had since its remaster. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's bad. I didn't find it dull. I found the characters interesting enough to more than kind of be on board with how they are. And I think it's one of the ones that kind of, again, saying this film's about masculinity, I don't quite get. It's more about how chauvinism affects females, really. But yeah, for all that, I didn't mind it. I would give it I would still recommend people give it a look, even if it is just for that historical curiosity value, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's if a counterpoint to say something like early Spike Lee, who's, I mean, a very different kind of energy to Spike Lee films, but he's looking at like a black working class in particular, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and this is very much middle class academic, which is so different. So it's the same kind of period as early Spike Lee,
yeah,
but a very different, in the same city as Spike Lee's working in, but a very different life to have a slice of. So it's interesting from that point of view. I don't think it's special, but I wonder if it might have been, had it actually been seen more at the time, if it had been able to have more influence on people.
Yeah. I suppose that's perhaps the opportunity cost of this kind of vanishing into the memory hole for 30 years, is what would this have inspired, what this has picked up, and what could this have been improved on, or otherwise sort of sparked off and had other kind of effects on the landscape. And we won't know that, because for some reason it just sat in a can for years for no appreciably good reason. And I mean, even if you think this was not a great film, and I suppose you get back into the realms of his cinema art, or is it a business? And it's a bit of both. And I suppose this might not have had a particularly wide audience in most film executives' mind. I can kind of see why they would pass up on the opportunity of it. But it fits in very well with the kind of modern indie scene. This is the sort of thing that you'd quite easily see being picked up as like the smaller scale indie releases, when it would be a lot easier to make this film as well, just with the advances of technology and needing less staff to capture what's fairly controllable scenes and all that stuff. We don't need a massive special effects budget or anything like that. So curiously, this is the kind of film that would probably fit in better with the kind of current film landscape than it did with the landscape back in the 80s. So perhaps it feels a bit more contemporary in that regard. It is certainly not a film that I think was bad enough to have vanished into a hole for 30 years. I think it deserves a bit more respect than that, and it's nice that this is now available for people to watch. And I'm sure there's a lot of particularly black females and black females directors that would be overjoyed to see this and are happy that it's getting a wider following. Yeah,
but this thing is like, because it nobody really knows about it until now, then it only has curiosity value.
Yeah.
It doesn't have importance. Because I'm sure there were other people making films, maybe just that also never really saw the light of day.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't mean to dismiss it by that. I just think that having missed being released at the time, that it doesn't have the importance it might have done. And I don't think the film's bad. I just didn't find it particularly interesting. And as I said, I'm frustrated by that, because there are things in there that could be really interesting. Mm-hmm. But I wonder just how much I was taken out of, or predisposed from the very beginning, because I hate that sort of saxophone score so very much, Scott. I really don't like it. But What's crazy though is that it's probably one of the reasons that it didn't get support was that basically no film executive knew any black professional women, basically. Like, they basically didn't think they existed.
That's a great reason, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's just willful ignorance, or it's just some sort of prejudice or racism, or they're just purely idiots, but none of them are good reasons.
Yes.
There's varied degrees of bad reason.
Yes. I'm as shocked as you are to find that the film industry is occasionally ran by absolute idiots. Who would have predicted it?
Also, just before we move on, Scott, is like, why the fortune teller scene? That stuck out to me. That seemed to not fit in with the rest of the film, unless I missed some meaning from that. But
it fits in because you've got a character who's been, well, the way that it's phrased in the film, like, devoting her life to the rationality of all this kind of things, and she's struggling very much to find the kind of connection that the ecstasy that she talks about in her writing, the way that an artist finds ecstasy by performing the work and getting that out, which she's not been able to replicate by producing her educational works of philosophy. And so she's trying to seek the other ways that people do, either through spirituality, either through this or by the religion, because she goes to a church after this as well, I think. So yeah, it's an attempt to kind of connect in those regards, which doesn't quite work. But I suppose that's the point of it. It's a scene that's not actually necessary. I think you could have got away quite enough just going with more of the religious angle, particularly given how that's spoken about, in the text of it as well.
Yeah.
But that's it. To me, it made sense, but it's not a particularly necessary scene. No.
At least I would have accepted the religious part of it, but it's just, I think I tried to keep an open mind, but I just shut down completely when it comes to fortune tellers. It's nonsense.
Yeah, as fortune tellers, there's a difference between keeping an open mind and letting your brain just fall out on the floor. So, yeah.